First of all, this whole video from start to finish is going to be recorded by one of the kit lenses, and I will label it right here. To make the footages easily comparable, I will shoot everything in Eterna picture profile and long up format, and I won't do any color grading. In this video, I will put these lenses to the ultimate test to figure out their strength and weaknesses to help me decide which one to keep and which one to get rid of. So this is how the 16-80mm looks like on the Fujifilm X-T4. It's a little bit bigger than the other one and it extends out further. It's also a bit heavier too, and it has weather sealing. This is the more expensive one out of the two. The 18-55 has two switches on it, one for the aperture and one for the image stabilization, and I love these switches. If you want a good handheld footage, for example, you simply switch off the OIS, it will automatically turn the IBIS off as well, and you don't have to go into the cameras menu to do this, like you do with the 16-80mm lens. There is a clicking aperture ring on both, but the only difference is that the 16-80 has a marked one. 18-55. This is what they cover at their widest, 16 versus 18. When I'm recording talking head shots like these indoors, normally I would prefer the 16mm focal length over the 18 because it creates a more open, spacious look. Well, see it for yourself. Here's the difference. And let me show you the difference between 80mm and 55mm as well. When I'm fully zooming in, I'm sitting an arm length away from the camera roughly, and this is what 80mm looks like. And now let me do the same thing with the 18-55 one as well. Let's zoom in fully to 55mm. Well, yeah, this is how close you get with 55. And you can see the background separation is pretty good. Here it is side by side, 80mm on the left, 55 on the right. But then of course, when it comes to these stocking head shots, I also want some background separation. As you know, I'm sure, the closer the subject is to the lens, the stronger the blur is going to be. But right now for this super scientific test, I'm sitting exactly the same distance away. So you can see the difference between 16mm at f4 versus 18mm at f2.8. So what do you think? I used to think an f4 aperture wasn't fast enough, but now I actually think it's perfect for most of the shots. And it's because having your aperture closed down a bit to f4 has two very important advantages while shooting videos that nobody talks about. Let me show you what they are. Let's take a super fast lens, like the Swiltrox f1.4. It has an extremely narrow line in focus while you're shooting wide open, which will make the micro focus hunting or beloved Fuji cameras like to do so much very visible and super disturbing. But the more you close down your aperture, the deeper the focus gets. So at f4, it's not just going to be the tip of your nose in focus, but your whole head, and this will let you use autofocus without that weird micro focus hunting in your videos. This means you don't always have to shoot in manual focus and worry about moving an inch. Second thing is, at f4, you will be able to set the correct shutter speed, twice of your frame rate, without using an ND filter, which will save you time and money, my friend. You may be thinking, if I have a faster lens, it doesn't mean that I always have to shoot at its widest. I can always close it down to f4, and when I need it fully open, for example in a dark environment, at least I have the option. And you're right, let's look at this exact scenario. I'm going to use this teeny tiny LED light in the dark to shoot a B-roll to see how they handle darkness. And here it is side by side. To push the boundaries even further, I recorded in slow motion at 120 frames per second with a 240 shutter speed. It's because in slow motion you need even more light to perform well. But as you can see, the first test here, they both did pretty good and there's no complaints. They're amazing. Even with this teeny tiny light, they perform pretty good. But what I'm going to do next is I'll turn away the light off the subjects to the background to bounce the lights from the background onto the subject, and this will really push the limits of what the lenses can do, and I'm probably gonna have to crank up the ISO and see what they can produce. What I did here, I set the ISO to auto, so the 16-80 lens cranked up its own ISO to 5800 to deal with the low light. And this is the image you get in that high ISO. It gets grainy at times, but it's still decent. It looks good, so I'm impressed. But when you switch to the 18 to 55, the ISO can be a lot lower. It actually stayed at 6400 and the image is a lot brighter. But of course, when you zoom in with the 18 to 55, the aperture will change because it has a variable aperture. It'll look exactly like the 16 to 80's image. All in all, when it comes to low light performance, the 18 to 55 is better at wide open because it has an f2.8 aperture versus f4. Let's take a look at the sun stars side by side real quick. Zooming in at 22. Let's find out who has the closest focusing distance at their widest field of view and when they're zoomed in. Final thoughts, both lenses are amazing. You can't really go wrong with either of them. The 18 to 55 is a lot cheaper. It has the OIS switch, a better focusing motor, wider aperture, and with that, low light performance is going to be better. And overall, the better option for videos in my opinion. However, the 16 to 80 has slightly better stabilization, weather sealing, longer focal range, closer focusing distance. It's the newer one of the two. I would say it's probably better for photography than the 18 to 55. They're so good in their own ways. I'm going to keep them both.